Let's be calm, breathe deep, slow down, and relax, because it's not going to be that kind of video that you've seen everywhere else on YouTube. I can already hear the thousands of hateful comments about a variety of different things relating to the title and thumbnail being written before any of you even watch this video, and I can already feel the cascade of dislikes washing over my body in an attempt to bury it because I'm a gaming YouTuber that's talking about politics. I don't normally like to do that. As a matter of fact, I've been trying my best to avoid that recently, but this subject is one that's important to me, and I'll say that if you've listened to this intro, why not sit back, relax, and just wait for a moment to hear what I have to say. Maybe you could even like the video instead of dislike it so I can help combat that sort of disaster, because I know the brigades will be here to up and down vote in various ways soon. Today's video is going to be about big media censorship and how that could impact our future. We're going to be talking about Section 230, we're going to be talking about platform versus publisher, big tech companies playing favorites, freedom of speech, net neutrality, internet conspiracies, and a variety of other topics. Of course, all of this was inspired by Donald Trump getting banned from Twitter, so we will be talking about him and that ban quite a lot today, but primarily from the standpoint of an example and less so about personal opinions or just getting clickbaity, easy views. Ironically, since we're going to be talking about people banned on Twitter, I mostly use Twitter for clickbait and easy views and stupid things. So if you want to see stupid political memes and COD memes and just gaming jokes, you can follow me there. It's not a super serious place. And I'm not going to talk very much at all about the DC riots or Capitol protests because today we are talking about freedom of speech on the internet. For the background, for that maybe 5 of you in the whole world that haven't heard this story, Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, and a variety of other social media companies have decided to ban Donald Trump yesterday to prevent him from posting, well, really anything. In lesser news, they got buried behind that. They also banned a variety of his supporters, friends, and some random QAnon conspiracy people. A lot of people flooded to Parler, the freedom of speech app, and that got pulled from the Google Play Store and is probably going to get pulled from the Apple Store or App Store before I'm done with this video over a lack of moderation, because Parler sticks to their guns about true freedom of speech, and it's wild. Parler is really, really wild, to be generous to it. So Parler's probably going to. So this was obviously in response to the DC riots and to the president supposedly promoting violence in that situation. Realistically, this is something that's been a long time coming because the president and the right-wing parties in the United States in general are kind of at war with big tech companies like Google, Apple, Facebook, Twitter, etc. Big tech generally has a left-wing censorship bias, and banning the president is indeed a form of censorship. I might be a left-leaning person myself, the biggest cuck you know, but the facts are facts, and banning somebody is in most cases a form of censorship. But was it a legal censorship, or a moral one, or even a corporate self-preserving one? Those are the topics that I want to talk about today. Let's start off with Section 230 of our communications laws. This is something that you've probably heard of before, and probably in the context of repealing or reforming Section 230. This is a very broadly written law that removes liability from big tech companies for hosting user-generated content. For example, I'm a YouTuber, and YouTube or Google or Alphabet or whatever company owns it cannot be held reliable for anything that I post here. If I break the law throughout the course of this video, if I leak sensitive military content, if I do something horrible and nasty, the consequences of that are on me and not on YouTube itself, because YouTube is a platform that hosts information and shares information from thousands or millions of people around the world with billions of hours of user-generated content, and it's impossible to scan all of it. So for YouTube, or really any kind of social media or communication website to work, they have to have broad protections about not being liable for the crazy things that their users will inevitably do. This kind of broad protection system is necessary to allow modern communications to work. Like it or not, it's just something we have to live with. And Section 230 of the law effectively defines what a platform and what a publisher is, and they're done so very broadly with a lot of overlap. This was kind of done on purpose as more of a feature instead of a bug or a consequence of poor writing. It was designed in a way that a website is allowed to curate its own content, which means that they can ban people, remove things, and clean up weird links to illegal stuff, but not also have to have responsibility for every little bad thing that they do on their website. So I am of the belief that this section may need an update in some capacity because it's clearly being abused. Websites are kind of able to eat their cake and have it too, or pick whatever side they need as they need it to justify almost any actions. However, I am not in favor of repealing Section 230. If you repeal it and replace it with, well, nothing, then every website ever is immediately liable both civilly and criminally for anything that their users do on it, and all internet and communications pretty much cease to exist under ridiculous amounts of legal and regulatory burdens. Free speech on the internet and internet communication in general just dies because it'll just be like the Wild West with everybody shooting lawsuits left and right, suing Google and Discord and everything. So if you don't like Section 230 for a variety of reasons, let's go with reform instead of repeal. And you may have also heard of platform versus publisher, which is very topical for today on talking about banning Trump, because the general public understanding of this is that platforms can post anything they want, but they can't curate it. And by curating, we're talking about editing, removing, censoring, cleaning up, or they lose their protections. If you're a platform and you just host user content, then you just host the content, you don't fool with it too much. Publishers, however, have less protections, but they have more freedom to curate content. They can choose what to post and what not to post and who to ban, but they are less protected from civil and legal liabilities. Right. Well, that's kind of how we want to think about it and maybe how it should be, but the law was written to be purposefully broad so that most websites can be platforms and publishers in order to maximize their personal freedom and in some ways minimize their corporate responsibilities. This system actually works really well in a world that's not on fire, suffering from a pandemic, or on the brink of various civil wars. When everything is going good, what happens on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube is at best drama alert levels of important, and whatever censoring or curating or people they ban and don't ban doesn't really matter. It doesn't really affect any of us, you know? However, when the stakes are very high and the disinformation campaigns are easier to find than actual information, this becomes very problematic, which is why I believe that we need some technology neutral legislation in the future. And technology neutral legislation means something that is written to apply to any type of technology and not a specific type of technology. So whatever new website, whatever new form of communication or thing comes up, the law will generally apply to broadly, like our Bill of Rights and freedom of speech, etc. Because right now, the internet is just the Wild West. It really, really is. And it's perhaps more problematic that algorithms can favor a certain kind of content and bury other kinds of content. It's sort of automated curating that happens behind the scenes in such a way that is so subtle that very few people can even tell that it has happened at all. And filtering content allows for big tech companies to push huge masses of people in certain directions, either originally toward purchases, but toward political goals if they so desire. It's almost like saying subliminal messaging. Yeah, we love that. We do that all day, every day. You guys go do that. No consequences. Good job, America. So that can definitely be problematic. So the question then becomes, does banning the president violate his personal freedom of speech? Or does banning anyone for really any reason on social media violate their freedom of speech and their ability to communicate with others? Well, it definitely may feel that way because they've been silenced in a sense. Their favorite method of communication is now gone. But the correct legal answer is no. It is absolutely not a violation of their freedom of speech. Our constitutional rights of freedom of speech allows us to speak in person, to gather together to speak, and to publish materials however we can. But an important distinction is that it does not grant us a legal right to use a specific website, or a specific social media tool, or a specific platform, or a specific book publisher or mailing service, except the US Post Office. They have to comply, but not the private ones. We are not entitled to TV time to speak on our ideas. We have to earn that, self-book publishing, or really anything. I think a lot of you already know this, but Twitter or any other company that you would contract to communicate your information in any way, be it a single image or an entire document, is perfectly within its legal rights to refuse your business or to ban anyone for any reason at almost any time. Funny story, these are the kinds of rules that I live under here on YouTube. YouTube has the unilateral right to wipe me from existence on this platform the moment it just feels like it. I don't have to do anything wrong. I don't even have to make videos. I don't have to have an opinion. I don't have to violate rules. They are a private, independent business with the ability to exercise their own freedoms of business, self-determination, and free speech. And I'm working under them so I can just poof and be gone no matter what for any reasons. So, was the president's reach of communication diminished by removing him from the Twitter platform? Yes, absolutely, very clearly. But does the president or anyone else have a legal right to force a third-party business to host their content? The answer is no. It would be kind of like forcing Twitter to post your beliefs regardless of if that's something that the company believed, or if it was something that was good for business, or even if it was dangerous. Similarly, you could argue that restricting a corporation, which in America we generally treat corporations as people from a legal standpoint, from exercising its own freedom of business, its own freedom to make choices. And in this case, according to our laws, if Twitter thinks it's in their best business interest to ban people, including the president, they are perfectly free to do so, because not having that right would almost be like compelled speech. It would be like compelling businesses to speak on your behalf, which should also not be legal. Similarly, people that get fired for posting various things on social media, or lose their jobs, or they go to protest and they get kicked out of their university positions or whatever, is also perfectly legal. Online posts are treated the same as saying something in a public place or otherwise making it known to be public. And when that happens, there's something called consequences for your action. A weird part about freedom of speech is that it does not compel agreement. It does not compel respect, and it also does not prevent social consequences. People are not required to listen to you. They are not required to respect you, and they are not required to ignore anything that you've said for any reason at any time. As a matter of fact, the founders specifically designed our freedom of speech to work this way with the goal of letting society shun or remove its own bad ideas, kind of the marketplace of ideas, where the good stuff rises to the top and all the dumb stuff just gets pushed to the bottom. However, I will say this is not true in all European countries. European countries, some of them have very different ideas of what freedom of speech entails. I've done a couple of different videos about this, but some of them are quite the opposite. They can compel you to listen and they can compel you to agree, and it gets a little crazy there, but that's not the point today. One thing that is the point is that it's ironic to me that Donald Trump appointed Ajit Pai to repeal net neutrality in 2016. That was one of his first big initial pushes. You can go back and see videos of me complaining about it. But he worked very hard to maximize corporate freedoms on the internet because that maximizes profit, and he's a businessman. And to be fair, he was mostly focused on internet service providers instead of individual websites, which is actually a far more dangerous thing to do. Those are the people that provide the internet to your house, your cable companies, your DSL companies, your fiber companies. It gave them a pretty much unilateral control to do whatever they want with it for any reason, but also other sites on the internet. It's funny to me that the system that he worked so hard to repeal would, at least in theory, offer him more legal protections against getting banned on Twitter, and that what he wanted actually gave Twitter more power to ban him. At the same time, many Republicans wanted net neutrality to roughly mean government control of search algorithms. They were unhappy with the results that would show up on Google and YouTube and Twitter and other places when you searched various Republican topics or conservative topics, broadly speaking. And what they wanted to do is force tech companies to rewrite their algorithms to show kind of equal amounts of content from both sides. Many of those same senators would argue that this is what repealing net neutrality is all about, and removing government control from the internet, but forcing government control to internet companies. From a legal standpoint, that's just not true at all. And it's also compelling speech because the algorithm and what it shows you is oddly a part of our freedom of speech. So doing that would be censorship in an entirely different way. So that's a giant legal discussion that we got through here in the beginning, just so to prove to you I'm not an idiot and that I kind of do know what I'm talking about. But now it's time for my personal opinions about this matter, which is where the video gets a lot more spicy and probably where I'm going to pick up the majority of my dislikes. From an ethical standpoint, I think that Trump's Twitter ban was long overdue. The man says crazy stuff all the time, but for the last 4 years, he has said crazy stuff with the full authority of his office and our entire country. Even you, even if you don't support the man or even if you love him, even the most diehard of Trump supporters and Republicans have to admit that Donald Trump has a big mouth and he likes to spout it off a lot. A lot of my Republican friends tell me that he'd be a much more popular president if he would just say about 1/10 of the things that he does say. But in the last couple of years, there have been threats of war being declared via Twitter, or I might declare war would just be a better way to say it, that we could declare war, talks of war on Twitter, threats to people's families via Twitter, which in this case was the Michael Cohen case, where the president vaguely threatened his family if he testified against him, which is also a crime. There were official policy announcements made through Twitter that bypass all chains of command in the government, military, secret, and otherwise, that leave people scrambling. True story. I have an inside source on this. I have a friend that works in DC in a place I don't even want to really talk about in a YouTube video. And I hear that, the president will just tweet at 1 a.m. Everybody wakes up, everybody gets to work to just upend and change all policy decisions and also figure out what's going on. And that's a very dangerous thing to have just going through social media. There are also hundreds, thousands of tweets that affect our stock market in various different unpredictable ways, except of course through the president, which he could use to manipulate the market and of course his own wealth. And that doesn't even start on the claims of election frauds, which are dangerous in and of themselves because the idea of propagating a widespread conspiracy about election fraud claims works to undermine our very republic and pretty much all of our freedoms, because one of the most fundamental aspects of being a republic or democracy or whatever you want to call what we are, federal republic, I think is what it is it undermines the integrity of our voting system. And it may cause our most mentally vulnerable citizens to become radicalized toward violence, which is exactly what happened this past week in Washington, D.C. Trump didn't exactly give marching orders, but that storm on the Capitol was clearly a consequence of him pushing his own brand of propaganda through sites like Twitter. Before I have to read any of your comments about various election fraud claims, I wanted to let you know that I've probably spent about 100 hours over the last month or so looking into these. I've read countless of, I think the best way to start is actually go to a conservative website and find their election fraud claims, or the politicians themselves, whoever's saying it. Start there, read their articles and read their sources, and then start cross-checking with official records, which is what I did. I read a lot of that, and then I would cross-check with state records, official sources. I would read the court affidavits, the documents, all the giant PDF files, the filings, the depositions. I watched God only knows how many videos, and even did a little bit of statistical work for some of the more unusual math claims about the election. And I spent far too much of my free time looking into this. And I mean seriously, like hundreds, thousands of pages of stuff, reading, looking into this. And I hate to tell you, but it's a big fat nothing burger. I know about a third to maybe 40% of America believes that the election was legitimately stolen, but I have not seen a single shred of truly interesting evidence that isn't relatively easily debunked, except the math one. The mathematical, statistical probability of votes in different districts is actually a really complicated one. Yet, despite this, our president will tell people that millions and millions of votes were stolen, that many of them were done illegally, that millions of dead people voted, millions of illegal people voted, that if you listen to his claims, he would have won by 100 million votes and didn't lose a single state, and all sorts of bizarre things like this. And if I were to believe that, if I were to believe that my vote was stolen or tampered with or tainted in any way, I too would be mad enough to march on the Capitol and perhaps overthrow it, because it's give me freedom or give me death. It's one of our fundamental rights, and when the right to vote is gone, everything else kind of falls apart. However, at the end of the day, the votes simply weren't tampered with this year. All of the heads of the various intelligence agencies that Trump himself appointed all said that they were safe. All of the Republican governors and Secretary of States and Supreme Court nominee, his own Supreme Court that's overwhelmingly Republican and overwhelmingly appointed by him, just kind of didn't want to hear it, because it's all nonsense. Even you would not believe the amount of lawsuits that were filed with hilarious typos in the title that go all the way down, and it's just rambling. However, even though the president knows it's fake, it's politically beneficial for him to keep pushing that claim and every single legal challenge possible, because it allows him to do two very important things. Number one, he can use his monstrously influential power to fundraise for the Stop the Steal or Fight the Fraud campaigns that fund the legal effort to challenge these vote manipulations or vote frauds. I'm losing track of what I'm saying here. These election conspiracies in court. However, what many of you may not know is that the vast majority of this money, something north of, 70, 80+% of it, actually doesn't go to fight the fraud or stop the steal. He's allowed to personally collect it for his own uses or his own debt or whatever, and a surprisingly tiny amount of it has actually been spent on these lawsuits, so it's just fleecing millions of Americans of their money. And secondly, it allows him to politically poison his rivals at the same time. If the president has lost, then undermining the integrity of the election undermines the future presidency of Joe Biden. It weakens the Democratic Party and puts him in a much better position to run for president again in 2024, one of his children's, or just anything really beneficial to him. Because if his successor comes in and the majority, or at least a huge portion of the population, believes that it was done illegally, then he will have less authority, less credibility, and a much more difficult time managing government. And all he had to do to accomplish both of these goals at once was undermine our entire democracy. Easy, right? Now, taking this personal topic and looping it back around to the big one today, social media companies of all kinds right now are struggling, truly, actually, fundamentally struggling to contain the explosive growth of conspiracy theories. Some of them are quite silly, like flat Earth or 5G causing coronavirus. But then there's some more serious ones, like various incorrect coronavirus myths. Coronavirus isn't real. Viruses isn't real is a new popular one. There are dozens of myths on both sides of the aisle about Russia and what Russia has or hasn't been doing, or China for that matter. There's election fraud myths about 2016 and 2020. Again, both sides of the aisle there. There was a bleach injecting movement, and not just recently when the president supposedly joked about injecting bleach or sunlight, but even before that, there was a surprisingly big bleach injection movement on YouTube, and children died because their parents would watch a bunch of videos and then inject their children with bleach. You've got to deal with QAnon, Sandy Hook, Alex Jones, all sorts of fun stuff like that. And all of these kind of things have just gone wild. They're growing like wildfire. They're becoming very mainstream. And social media only helps to amplify these messages thousands of times larger than what they would normally be. Then it helps create an echo chamber where all of the people that believe, or at least want to believe in these things, are allowed to self-contain in a group, never challenge each other, and only build each other's confidence up to the point where they might do something stupid. These are all topics that are very easily researchable, debunkable, and for the most part, nonsensical. However, huge portions of the population do not have the training or the mental capacity to do proper research. You have to learn how to learn. That was one of the most important things that I learned in high school and college, was the tools with which you needed to learn something new. As I was taught by a teacher in high school, we're not here to teach you every fact about life. I'm not here to teach you how to, memorize all the answers and take a test. I'm here to teach you how to learn so that when anything comes your way in the future, you can handle it. And that's a skill that I have, but unfortunately, I do not believe the majority of the people have that skill. Even if they think that they do, they just literally don't. For example, I recently read an article about the importance of first impressions. Psychologists and some clinical researchers wanted to learn how important first impressions were on people's ideas and how hard it was to change them. And what they found was that for roughly about a third of people, maybe a quarter of them, first impressions were literally everything. There was nothing even remotely as close as a first impression, to the point where they would perhaps show an article. They would do like little things. If I remember this correctly, it's been a long time, but they would show like a picture of a person and then have an article down there below that says they stole something or another from a store. And then they would ask him, is this person a thief? And of course, 100% of people say yes. And then they would show people a video of that person going into the store, picking up an item, and walking out without paying, but then turning around and coming back in and saying, whoops, I forgot about it. Here, let me pay. Is this person a thief? Now, 75% of the people would say yes, but about a quarter of them, maybe a third, I don't remember the exact number, would say, yeah, they're a thief. And they would say, well, you just watched a video of them not stealing. It was an honest mistake. Nope, they're a thief. And they kind of expanded this and did various political tests. But at the end of the day, the result was that for a certain and not small percentage of our population, they do not have the mental capacity to organize information in their brain properly. They don't know how to sort its level of importance or relevancy. And for the entirety of their lives, they've primarily relied on first impressions, and whatever the first thing they learn that's useful, it sticks. And they don't really sort of meta and analyze anything going in their brains for fact checking, for lack of a better word. Now, politicians have known that for thousands of years, so they work very hard to get that first impression out there first, to get an ironclad control of this group of people who are unfortunately the least capable among us, and social media makes that very much so easier to do. I've had personal experience with this, trying to convince various members of my family that coronavirus is real, Joe Biden does not subsist on drinking the blood of children, injecting bleach into yourself is a bad idea, and that the earth is indeed round. You can get on an airplane with me if you want to. The kinds of conspiracies and ideas that were once amusing to me are now terrifying because of how many people truly believe them almost on a religious existential level and are thus willing to act on those beliefs. And this is just a fraction of the weird ideas out there, and I'm sure that more will crop up even before this video is done playing for those of you that have even watched this far. Twitter, as a company, has surely had enough of this and wanted out. YouTube did. They've been censoring flat earth and bleach injecting for a long time. Facebook doesn't particularly seem to care. But other social media websites are trying to filter this stuff out because it's poison for some people's brains. And in the case of Trump, I don't think they just wanted to hear any more of his nonsense promoting various conspiracy theories because, number one, it's dangerous for the entire country. Number two, it's a bad look for their business, which could cause them to have less profits if their stock prices drop, if the president is using their platform for something bad, for lack of a better word. And it kind of probably grossly violates their own internal policies about posting. You know, I just say probably. I love putting probablys in there because I'm a very probabilistic thinker. But no, realistically, it does. A lot of the things the president has posted, I would have been banned for years and years ago. They're just wildly against the rules. And finally, Trump is in a lot of ways their political enemy because of his desire to repeal Section 230, and also probably just because of their general belief systems. Twitter and most big tech companies are naturally left-leaning. President, of course, is not. So they just straight up banned him. And when that happened, I'm not going to lie to you guys about it, I laughed. I laughed so hard. I haven't laughed that hard in like a year. And I thought it was hilarious because he got banned for things that I would have been banned for a decade ago. Stuff that the president did and got away with, I could not get away with as a D-grade YouTuber. So to me, that's a good thing. That's a fair thing, right? However, there's a lingering concern about the spirit of freedom of speech. As we discussed earlier, it's likely that no laws were violated, but the spirit of freedom of speech got trampled on pretty hard. You would think that big tech companies, social media companies that specialize in allowing people to communicate and letting their messages go as far and as wide as possible would want to distribute the president's messages, even if it were things that they don't personally like, because part of freedom of speech is kind of just letting people say whatever they want, even if you don't like it. But now corporations like Twitter and Facebook and probably Google in the near future are directly opposing the government that is supposed to have the authority to regulate them, and they're opposing it very successfully too. There's not a lot of pushback on this. It also helps that all these companies are multinational, so if things get dicey, they can just pull out of the US and say, hey, we're incorporated in Ireland or Panama or something, and still provide the same internet services and pay even less than the 0.01% nothing tax that they pay right now, and there'll be less American jobs, so they can just bounce. So there's an unequal power balance between corporations and government, in my opinion. And my fear is that while it may be a good thing today that Trump has to sit in Twitter jail and shut his big mouth for a little while, give us a little time to breathe before the next big disaster happens, that this may set a precedent of media giants playing big-time favorites in politics. And they definitely do now. A lot of you immediately want to say they already play big-time favorites in politics. I know. I'm aware of this, right? But what we're seeing today could be the baby steps. This could be magnified many thousands of times over if they wanted to. For example, what would happen if Twitter wanted to run a disinformation campaign about a competitor? Competing business is what I'm talking about. Or what if they wanted to run a smear campaign against a politician that's likely to pass a law that was not favorable to them? And there's probably a good number of you that believe that this has already happened, that Twitter has already done this. And I'm not talking about filtering search results and banning a few conservatives here and there. I'm talking about a multi-billion-dollar corporation slapping $100 billion worth of money on the table to hire a marketing campaign, psychologists, psychoanalysts to build an algorithm to fake videos and stage actors and all this kind of conspiracy stuff that you would normally see coming out of Alex Jones to run a bold disinformation campaign and confuse the ever-living heck out of millions of Americans. That hasn't happened yet, but that definitely could happen. Or, I mean, we're talking like a multi-million-dollar marketing team worth of fakery here, which we just have not seen. Or what happens when Google just decides to control the flow of information about its competitors? Oh wait, it's already kind of doing that. What happens when Facebook wants to create its own political party? Imagine the Facebook party. Imagine the Zuckerberg party, and he can just snap his fingers and convert the entire platform into being exclusively for his party and his ideas. That's incredibly dangerous. It's a total control of information. And yes, things are bad today. There are disinformation campaigns that are real today. There are fake things that come up. But if this is considered to be normal, it could explode and magnify into a truly dystopian level future, like cyberpunk kind of crazy if it continues. As of today, there are only a few companies in the whole world that are gatekeepers of the majority of digital information, probably 100 to 200 of them. What happens when there's less because corporations are consolidating? And what can we as people do if they decided to close the gate or redirect it? Well, there are lots of smart people that can make their own servers at home or buy them or host their own websites, their own projects. You have the USB dead drops. You have a lot of VPNs and stuff. It gets worse when ISPs want to turn off internet access, because then you couldn't access any site no matter what. You could only see the sites that they wanted to let you see. And we're not talking about getting on Google. I'm talking about, like, if you typed in Bing, it would just say Bing doesn't exist, and that's it, which was kind of the whole point of net neutrality. They wanted to do things like this. Really smart, tech-savvy people would probably be okay. You could find out workarounds and stuff. But what about the 99% of people that are casual internet users that don't have the skill set to find complicated workarounds for technological censorship? What happens to anybody that isn't highly educated in these topics? Well, the reality is that they get stuck in an illusion that they don't even know that they're in and can't possibly hope to escape. And their decisions ultimately become less impactful and more erratic or controlled, which is something that scares me. So I in a way, I'm happy that Trump got banned, but a part of me looks at this and just sweats and goes, oh man, this might not be the best step forward toward the future. That if this starts happening all the time, things are going to get very, very wild. And I do not have all of the answers for you today on what we should do. I am not that smart. I am not that perfect. I don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. And, be honest with you, I don't think there's a perfect solution to any of this. However, I think that American tech companies should adhere to the spirit of freedom of speech as much as possible. And I think that we need to seriously consider updating our ideas about platform versus publisher, our overall ideas about freedom of speech on the internet, our Section 230 laws, and a variety of our laws that are so archaic that they don't really apply to modern technology. It is time for us to sit down as a people and come to an agreement, which is the hardest thing in the world to do now, thanks to social media, and try to find a better way forward in the future, because the time for us to sort of plug this dam and stop this flood of media control is coming to an end sooner rather than later. Guys, that's all for today's video. I hope that you have enjoyed my rambling. If you did, don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe. Drifter out.